Hi everybody! Today I am making underwear. So that's what they look like when they're done. The first step, of course, is to sew on the gusset. What makes my underwear different than everyone else's is the entire body piece of the underwear is one piece. There's no seam. So I have to just tack the gusset on so that it stays in place while I am sewing. So I'm just using a straight stitch here, stitching as close to the edge as possible, because this stitching line I'm doing right now will be encased by the elastic. You won't see it. It's just to help me on my way while I am doing the next step. So there she is. The gusset is now attached onto the cover stitch. Okay, so the next thing I'm doing here is stitching down the back of the gusset. I only do the back for reasons which will make sense as we go. So this is a little complicated because I'm sewing blind. You can see that the gusset is down here. So I have to just use my many years of sewing expertise and skill to feel my way along so that I can get that stitch lined up exactly perfectly. And then you can see that it all comes out in a string. Because if you're a sewer, you know you can't just start sewing on the edge or the sewing machine will eat the fabric and you'll get a ball. So you have to kind of keep sewing continuously. So that's what I'm doing here. And this machine, of course, is called the cover stitch machine because you can see how the looping threads on the bottom cover over that edge. So that is what is going to give you that really nice, comfortable feeling of knowing that nothing is moving around or shifting or bunching up or doing anything unpleasant in your butt area. I like to sew the side seams only with a 1/8 of an inch serging swath because we just want to reduce the amount of bulk that is in the underwears in total, of course. When you're doing mass production like this, every little task that you have to do matters. So I always sew straight through on these because that's half as many threads as I have to clip, which will make sense to you in a second. So see, these are all sewn together, right? And then I just only have to clip once to get this bad girl separated. So now we have the side seams done. The back gusset has been sewn down, the front gusset has not. That'll make sense in a second. You can see the swath here. It's fairly narrow, it's about 1/8 of an inch. We're going to top stitch that seam down too. And the other thing I do periodically, and especially, it's really funny, but you have to check every time you change thread colors too because it can change the tension. I always give a good yank as hard as I can to make sure that that stitch is not breaking because this is a garment that's going to be getting a lot of very hard use, right? Like I guarantee you a minimum of 150 washes with these. And I reasonably expect quite a few more than that. So when this going through the washing machine and the dryer, 200 times, these stitches cannot break. So that's something I always got to pay attention to. The first thing I'm going to do is stitch down this seam allowance. It's only 1/8 of an inch, but I don't want that rolling around in there, right? And then I'm going to skate right onto the top of the gusset, and then I'm going to skate onto the other side. Because you can't stop sewing. You got to just kind of keep continuously sewing, and the underwears are a circle, right? So I can't just do both side seams because what am I going to do in the middle? So that's why I do the back first. And then I have a straight line that I can sew easily, continuously, from the side seam to the front of the gusset, to the side seam. And then when I get to the end, I have these little pieces of scrap so that I can sew onto something, because it'll all get very messed up if I don't sew onto something. And then, just like all the other steps, it's all attached. So I gotta turn them inside out, I gotta clip them, I gotta check and make sure that I perfectly got, covered that side because I'm sewing blind there. And then we're finally gonna be ready to put some elastics on, yay! This is another one of the big differences between the way I do underwear and the way everybody else does underwear. Usually there's just a big roll of elastic, it's beside the machine, they just sew it on willy-nilly, and of course then they have those joints on the hip that are always digging in. So I measure every single elastic, leg hole, waist, and then you get the consistency of fit, and of course you get that nice flat finish. sew all these elastics into circles. And this one is really nice to have the automatic sewing machine because it does a lot of the work for me. I've got it set to stitch a certain number of stitches each way, which really reduces the accuracy that I have to painstakingly do when I'm sewing in this very small area. So these are the leg hole elastics. So now the circle is sewn, and the next thing I'm going to do is stitch down these edges, because otherwise when I fold them the edges are going to stick out. So I just go around the edges, stitching them down to make sure that when they are actually on the leg hole, you get a nice clean finish. I'll show you what I mean here. See how it's stitched around the edge? So that when it gets folded in half around the leg hole, you're not going to have, like this one which hasn't been stitched. See how those corners are poking out? So that's the next fun thing. And then once I have a whole pile of those, then I have to go in and clip all of these threads. And then the last thing I do before I sew them on, I don't have chalk here right now, but I mark the halfway point, which is going to align with the notches in the underwear to ensure that every elastic goes on in a balanced manner. So it's the same amount of stretch on the front and the back, and it's not like puckering on the front and then too big on the back or something like that. Down here in the crotch there's a little notch, so that's where I match up the first notch. I mark these ones I used dust chalk, like this, like sidewalk chalk. So when you buy your underwear, you may notice that there is a small little white mark down in the crotch there, and also on the side seam. Obviously those will just wash out with, all you need is a little bit of water. That's not permanent. That's just so that I can mark the halfway point to ensure that I get good balance. So I'm over here at the cover stitch machine again, but this time I only have one needle. Now it's going to look like a straight stitch on one side, but on the other side you're going to see all the loops. Now why am I sewing this here on this machine as a straight stitch rather than on the other one? Because this machine produces a chain stitch. So what that translates into is a stitch that is going to be able to stretch, and that'll make sense in a second. You may also notice on my machine here I have a thick cut of masking tape over there, and this is an excellent way to make a guide. So if you are a sewer and you're looking for a guide, like you can buy this kind of thing, these magnetic guides, but they're useless because they move so easily. Tape doesn't move. Moreover, tape is extremely inexpensive, and you can make it whatever thickness, whatever size you want, and get exactly the guide you want. The other thing is, in this situation, you can see this guide is actually under the presser foot. Well, that wouldn't be of any use to me there, and that's what enables me to get that perfect straight stitch every single time. So you just get a roll of masking tape and you just cut your guide out, just chunk it out. So anyway, back to the reason that this is a chain stitch. This needs to be able to stretch, right? If I was doing this with my straight stitch, you'd be able to hear breaking. Now I'm going to pull a little harder, because remember when I stitched on the gusset, I used a straight stitch there, right? When I pull hard on this leg hole, hear that breaking? That's the basting stitch under here breaking. But that doesn't matter. When I go around and check the rest of the leg, the stitch that's now holding that elastic on is in perfect nick. So that's one leg hole. The waistband and leg hole elastics are the same, but around the leg holes, I'm actually folding the elastic in half, and it's going around the edge. But for the waist, I am going to do this by applique. So the elastic stays flat. You can see I'm lining the chalk mark up with the side seam. I don't know if you can see that or not. And the elastic overlaps the body fabric by about 1/4 inch. So this is sewing blind again, because I can't actually see the other side. But after sewing as many pairs of underwear as I have, I can feel it. So I'm using the index finger of my left hand to feel where that elastic is, so that it's lining up quite nicely there. Sometimes, I waver a 1/16 of an inch here or there, but usually I'm pretty close. You can see on the right side there, at the top of the elastic, I have another masking tape guide here. So that's keeping the top edge of the elastic from moving and ensuring that at least that aspect is something I don't really have to think about, so that I can just focus on keeping the underlayer where it needs to be. You'll also notice that I'm stretching while I'm sewing, and this is the case with all of the elastics. So this is just one of the reasons that it gets stretched out while it's sewn, and why you have to stick it in the dryer to shrink it back up again. Your underwear will probably feel a little loose the first time you wear them, and this is why. So there we are at the end, and that has been very nicely sewn on. At the side seams here, I usually just have to go in and give a little clip, because there's usually some threads kind of hanging around there. Clean it up nicely. As your underwear gets washed, of course, other little threads may come loose. As with all clothing, never pull a loose thread. You always want to have a nice little pair of snips like this in your underwear drawer somewhere handy, so you can just clip off any loose threads. Okay, so what I'm doing now is putting on the size labels. Of course, there's no label in the underwears anywhere, because the last thing you want in underwear is labels, right? And a lot of the bigger companies, they'll actually print it on here, but obviously I don't have, you know, the resources to do that. So what I do is just based on these little pieces of paper, I always leave the thread long, so you can just pull it out very easily, but it's affixed well enough that, you know, during the course of normal handling, during the sales process, it's not going to fall off. I was using stickers initially, and they all fell off, and then I never knew what size anything was. So yeah, this is a good little solution that's been working for a couple years now. And I have to tack all these seams that I just sewed. So remember I talked about how in the leg holes I'm using a chain stitch, because a chain stitch stretches? The other thing with a chain stitch is it's a stitch that will easily come unraveled if I keep pulling on this. You've all had this happen with a t-shirt, right? One thread comes loose and the whole thing goes. You've probably had it happen on your underwear lots of times too. So I tack the ends of every single seam. It's why I leave the threads nice and long, so that I can easily find the end of the seam. And then there are 3 seams, right? 2 leg holes and the waist, that all need to be going over to ensure that they do not unravel. And then, once that is done, I will have a giant heap of underwears that all have a whole lot of threads dangling off them. So I like to make a big heap on the table, and then I have to go in, and this is called cleaning in the industry. I have to go in and clean them and get all of these hairs off. I also like, when I'm doing this, I always just give the bottom thread a little pull. That's the one that's going to unravel, just to ensure that that stitch, the safety stitch, has completely stopped it from unraveling. And that way you'll be able to wash these 150 times at least without the seams ever unraveling. And then once I get them all on my table, I'm going to fold them up all nicely, and then soon they'll be on the website. And here they are. All done. This is half. All folded. So, get them online. See you in studio. Maybe at the market in the summer. Bye.